Go out and make offers. You don't make offers, you're not going to buy property. I would make 100 offers in a month sometimes. Yeah, and I don't care. Yeah, here's my offer. You don't have to take it, but here's my offer. So go make an offer today.
Hello, and welcome to Mornings with Joel, Commercial Real Estate Podcast, where we focus on rising stars and established players in commercial real estate and talk to them about how they are building legacies in today's marketplace. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining the Mornings with Joel CRE Podcast, and we're welcome to have you here with us today. We have Ron Faraci, who is our special guest today. We're going to be talking about his life and his experiences in the multifamily investing space as it relates to CRE. And it should be a very interesting discussion, especially when you find out about his background. So, Ron, we're excited to have you with us today. Hello and welcome to the show.
No, thanks for having me on. I'm excited about it as well to share with your listeners.
All right, fantastic. So, Ron, you've got some experience here, some history. Obviously, I green-lighted, coming on the show and whatnot, because I found some value in some things that were actually interesting in your background. And basically how you transition from being like a supply house guy, to owning all these multifamily assets. I mean,
I love that. Yeah.
that's kind of interesting. So, tell us, why should our audience be listening to you today? Because I think
so my story, I guess, isn't that interesting. Everybody has a story, right? I'll tell you mine. I'll go through the highlights anyway. So, high school educated, nobody, single mom. I mean, insert, story there. And my wife and I moved to Southern California decades ago, ended up getting lucky in life, no skill at all. Got a sales job, commission only, right? Just eat what you kill. But it ended up for one of the co-founders of the Home Depot. And so I learned along the way that at the foot of the master, if you will, and did that for a few years, did very well for myself. It's the only thing I found I was good at in life. I can't really do anything. I could sell construction supplies fairly well, it turns out. Mm-hmm. So I got on that treadmill for a while. And, living in Orange County, California, for those of you listeners who may not know, super expensive. I mean, hyper expensive. Dennis Rodman lived a couple miles from me. It was another world, if you will, but it just kind of shows you how expensive it was. So, and what I learned was, for the first time in my life, I'm making some money. My wife is doing well. She's a CPA. I mean, we don't have kids. We're doing really well. But what I learned was that stress never went away, right? Because growing up, you're stressed because you don't have any money. Yeah. Well, once I started to get some money, I was always stressed because what if I lose it, right? And I don't have an Ivy League degree. I'm a high school knockaround guy. Yeah. So can I ever get back here? So I always felt like I had that piano hanging over my head, just waiting for it to fall. And so my wife and I made the decision to move back to Connecticut, which is where we grew up, to buy small multifamily buildings. And the thought process was that if we could get enough people to get up in the morning, brush their teeth, walk the dog, get in the car, sit in traffic, go to a job they hate, come home and do that over and over again, and they give us a third of their paycheck the first of the month, then we don't have to go to work. And it was it was as simple as that. I should probably polish that story up and create more meaning out of it, but that was really the whole thing. Was I just didn't want to work anymore. I wanted to spend my time with my dogs, my wife, hanging on the beach. So we moved to Connecticut. I got a job because of my LA connections, and just as a sales guy, Fortune 500 company, high school educated. I don't know how to read a spreadsheet. I don't even know what P&L really is, but I ran an entire division as the VP of sales without, knowing how to do anything. 2008 happens. And the economy, as you guys know, just cratered. Yeah. And so America was on sale. I mean, it was a dumpster fire. And so, well, I think Tony Robbins said it best, right? If you want to take the island, you have to burn your boats. So what do? I quit. I quit my job, and I went all in. I mean, in poker, I pushed all my chips in and the reason I quit my job was because that was the only way I could access my 401k. Right? Because I wanted to empty it. And every financial advisor listening to this right now is their ears are bleeding, going, no, don't do that. So we thought about it, and my wife had a job and we don't have kids. So I had a bit of a safety net that some people don't enjoy. And I recognize that. So, but So what I learned was a 401k is not tax-free money. It's quite the opposite, right?
Mhm.
So I had to pay the tax. So instantly my balance became roughly 30% less. Then I also learned that because I was not 59 and a half years old, there's an additional 10% penalty. So really my balance was cut, no, not quite in half. Anyway, so I go and I start buying properties, putting
Mhm.
25% down, using my wife's job as, the reason to get the mortgage. And what I found out, I bought 3 properties. Now I'm out of money, out of a job, and I've got 3 properties, and then I learned how to buy them without banks through the local RIA. I joined the local RIA, and RIA stands for Real Estate Investors Association. They're all throughout America. There's over 200 of them. And that RIA taught me, "Wait, you don't go to banks. That's not how the players do it." And I'm like, "Yes." And so turns out that's true. So then I just went into hyperdrive. I mean, I was making offers, I was getting laughed at, I was whatever, I got a life to build. And, fast forward, had some successes, had a lot of failures too, it's worth noting. My wife and I ended up owning and managing several hundred low income rentals. And we settled it on the low income side because, you know, who was it? Dillinger or Willie Sutton famously said, "Why did you rob banks?" Well, because that's where the money is. I wasn't looking for passive, I was looking for income.
Mhm.
So that's where the money was and all the headaches that go with that. And I've learned quite a few lessons over the years, thus I'm talking to you today. But ran it hyper efficiently, very profitably, and then I ended up buying that RIA probably about 7 years ago that trained me how to do it. So the owners, my original mentors, were retiring and they approached me and a few other people, I'm sure, and I ended up acquiring it with 2 partners, and we ran it up until about 6 months ago, and then we just sold it. So which was kind of a mixed emotion thing for me because,
Mm.
for the first time in my life, it was interesting that I'm not a give back kinda guy. I'm a low income landlord, so
Mhm.
I'm not a give back guy. But owning that RIA, I really had a front row seat to lives being changed. And I gotta tell you, that was eye-opening. That was kinda cool. So, I'm not involved in it officially anymore, although I still try to stay involved unofficially, but it was an interesting full circle moment. So, the RIA sells, I sold my properties, retired to Florida, that's where I'm at right now. I live in a private lagoon community in St. Augustine, Florida. It's amazing, way beyond my education or intelligence
Mhm.
level, I acknowledge that. And I found myself bored. So, about a few months ago, I said to my wife, she's like, "What are you gonna do? What's your next chapter?" And the age-old thing is, what do you do when you don't need the money, right? I mean, so I had a lot of people asking me for my lease. I have a 31-page lease, which is ridiculous, I acknowledge that, but that's the necessity in a blue state if you wanna be a landlord, especially a low-income landlord. So I bought bulletprooflease.com domain name and started a TikTok channel. I think I'm officially the oldest guy on TikTok, but it kind of resonated with people. I'm kind of unfiltered on there and I
Right.
give tips and tricks and so my lease sells really well. It's a hobby, it's not a real business. I wrote a book, a 343-page book, The Landlord War Chest, 300 tips and tricks to survive the low income game and ways to kind of make it more profitable. And thus to conclude my story, here I am with you.
Well, how about that?
Yeah, that's quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, but that's interesting. So yeah, let's rewind the tape a little bit. And before I forget, that interesting point you mentioned, St. Augustine, isn't that officially the oldest city in America?
You know what,
So,
dude?
right, close
You
to
are smart.
600.
You know your stuff. I got to tell you, a lot of people don't realize that. 1565. I'm from New England, and I think 1750 is old.
Yeah,
1565. Yeah, it is.
yeah,
It's a cool city.
yeah, yeah. Beautiful, beautiful architecture down there. It's a great place.
Stunning,
So,
stunning.
yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. So, so let's go back. So you described, the journey. I certainly appreciate it, and it is quite remarkable. I wanted you to share all of that so our listeners can say, because a lot of people feel, well, like, how am I going to go from here to there, right? And that
Yeah,
first step is always the hardest step. So, what did you focus on? Did you focus on 100-unit properties where you can outsource management? I mean, what did you
yeah.
really do to get those first couple of deals done?
Good question, Joel. I get that question a lot. Being a fairly large landlord in our market, I get that a lot. It's like, why don't you just buy a 100-unit building instead of 10 units to keep it
Mhm.
simple? I don't like big buildings. I'll tell you why. So when you go to buy a big building, you're competing against institutional money. The
Mhm.
problem with that is they're getting Fannie and Freddie financing super
Yeah.
cheap. They're getting money cheaper than you, and they don't need the return that you need because they're just guys in suits. I call them banksters. They're guys in suits looking for 3, 4, 5%. They just gotta beat the 10-year treasury by half a point. And that's how they justify their living. It ain't their money. And you're never going to compete with that. It's a race to the bottom. They're totally fine with small returns. So instead of going up, which everybody teaches you, scale up, scale up. No, scale down. Okay. There's more money. You're going to pay less per unit for a small property because you're competing against a less sophisticated buyer who needs a better return. So it's not a race to the bottom. The other reason I don't like big buildings is so if you had a 100-unit portfolio, 10-unit buildings or a 100-unit building, the person that buys a 100-unit building would argue one driveway, one roof. Sure, I understand that, but that's also the Achilles heel. Okay, so one sewer backup into the basement, city shuts you down. You're out of business. You're putting 100 people in a hotel. How
Mhm.
long can you do that for? You're out of business. I bought buildings that way. One fire, you're out of business. Oh, I'm insured. 6 months later, you'll get a check, maybe. And by the way, most people don't realize this. If you have a mortgage, you ain't getting that check, sunshine. Your mortgage is getting the check. So it puts people out of business. So to diversify your risk, both from a physical asset perspective, but also geographically, right? Neighborhoods turn. You bought a class C, and they open up a methadone clinic next door. Well, now you've got a class D,
Yeah.
so you don't own what you used to own. So I like to diversify my risk.
Okay. Okay. Well, no, that's a that's a good way to look at it. And now, full disclosure, I am a banker, so keep that in mind as we
Of
have
course
this
you are.
conversation. No, 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 it's fine. I
Nice,
brought you on the
nice.
show, right? So
I love it.
I understand all that, but I do want to highlight those points because you're right. I mean, there's an advantage to the bigger, there's an advantage to the smaller.
Absolutely.
So you definitely see that. But everybody has to carve out their niche, and obviously you've
That's it.
got your niche as to what you decided to do. So you started with smaller properties, and did you go a bank route or did you negotiate with the owners? I mean, how did those first few deals come together?
About half and half.
Okay.
And roughly half and half. So usually a DSCR is how I did it. Full doc for commercial properties. And for those listeners of yours, Joel, that don't know this, commercial means 5 units and above. So for full doc, I'm gonna pay a little bit less in interest, of course, over a DSCR loan. However, a commercial full doc is typically 20 to 25 years in amortization, right? So whereas DSCR is 30 years. So I can pay a little bit more in interest on a DSCR because I got a longer time frame. Now the argument, as you know, as a banker, is that well, I'm not paying off much principal, right? Because it's
Yeah,
amortized longer.
doesn't matter.
But
Yeah.
I don't care, so I'm here for the cash flow because I don't want to go to work. So about half the time, that's the route I went. The other half was split between either owner financing, which is my favorite way to go. I prefer the
Mhm.
owner to be my bank, right?
Right.
And a lot of people think that, oh, owner financing, what do you just meet a guy in an alley once a month and pay him? No, and you know this better than anybody. What people need to understand about owner financing is that there's no difference between owner financing and bank financing. None, zero, zip, nada. One says, I'm just using Bank of America as an example. One says Joe Smith, so a mortgage is nothing but a lien on a building. You own the building when you close, unlike when you buy a car, right? When you buy a car, you make all your payments. When you make your last payment, you get the title. That's not how real estate works. At
Mm.
closing, you get the title, and then a lien is on it, the mortgage. So I prefer owner financing. If they're underwater, don't have a lot of equity, or have a large mortgage on it, depending on the deal, sometimes I'll pivot out of owner financing if I think of maybe a due on sale could kind of trip me up a little bit, and I'll pivot over to a master lease or a master lease with an option to take control of the building, potentially ownership,
Mhm.
but not always. So that's
Right.
usually how I went about it.
Gotcha, gotcha. So let's talk about that a little bit because you're right. The biggest thing that you would run across is do on sale clauses as it relates to those mortgages, which obviously negates the advantage. It basically could kill the deal. I mean, you didn't have to
Yeah,
go out and
yeah,
do it traditionally. So how do you generally put together a master lease? You don't have to give us the secret sauce, for your deals, but how do you, for the most part, structure those for the sake of our audience so
yeah,
that we can know kind of how to approach it that way? What is a master lease? Let's start there and how to do
yeah.
that. Why don't we start
Well, it's a really great question. It's a really underutilized strategy. So the best analogy I can give you is the Empire State Building in New York, which everybody knows that building. That's under a master lease, 100 and I think 61-year master lease. So think of it this way. It's let's use a 6-unit building as an example, just a small building.
Sure.
What's nice about a master lease is a lot of people spend their time, energy, and their money looking for owners, right? They're sending them yellow letters, they're driving for dollars, hanging bandit signs, trying to get an owner to find them. How about instead of that, you just call a for rent ad? There's the owner, that's the landlord on a 6-unit building, unless he's got property management. Most of the time, it's the landlord. So call a for rent ad. There's the owner that you've been looking for, and just say, hey, I noticed you're renting one of your units. Would you be interested in renting the entire building and getting rid of all your headache, right? I take care of all repairs, maintenance, vacancies. I just send you a check, Joel. Tell me where to send you the check. Now, of course, I'm going to try to get you down to a number that is good for you, Joel. What's your current NOI? I'll pay you that. But I need to know that there's a spread there. So if I owe you 4,000 a month, for instance, but I know this building's under rented and it should be 6,500 a month, well, then I'm going to bring in 65 and I owe you 4. So I'm gonna make $2,500 a month, but I do a 20-year lease. So the advantage to you, Joel, as the seller, quote unquote seller, is that you just get your 4 grand no matter what. Busted toilet, my problem.
Right.
Vacancy, my problem. You get your 4 grand no matter what. All repairs and maintenance are me and vacancy. All CapEx is you. Okay. Because Joel, you still own the building. And Joel, you get all the tax benefits. You can still keep depreciating that thing over the next whatever amount of years you got left on it. So all the benefits of ownership, but none of the headache. Okay. So, but I need control of the building for 20 years. Correspondingly, I may or may not attach an option to that. Okay. So traditionally, how it works is if you're trying to sell that building for 600, 500,000, let's say, Joel, and I called and say, "Hey, Joel, 500,000 looks good." I walked the building. I was like, "Joel, I'll tell you what, I don't know if it's worth 500 if I can get financing because you got 2 furnaces that don't work or whatever, But how about this, Joel? How about instead of buying it, why don't I give you $4,000 a month for 20 years? And then I'll also do an option for 650,000. Ooh, 650. So I'm trying to appeal to your sense of greed. Now, am I going to exercise that option for 650? Probably not. I just want the cash flow for the next 20 years. So sometimes I'll dangle a big option just to kind of incentivize them to take the cash flow deal. I can do the reverse of that. I can say, hey, instead of 4 grand a month, how about I give you 6 grand a month, Joel, in your pocket? You don't have to do nothing, but instead of $500,000, let me have an option for 400,000. So I can go up or down. So then I've just created 2 securities, right? So let's say you take my cash flow deal and I'm making 2 grand a month for 20 years. Well, can I sell that? Of course I can. So if I approached you as, hey, Joel, I've got this cash flow by a master lease, it's secure as you can get. I've got 18 years left, that 2 grand a month profit. Give me 50 grand for it and it's yours, right? I created a security. So a master lease is a great way to go, especially if you're starting off, because I'll typically do a master lease deal with 10 grand down. That's it. 10 grand down. And we can sign that tomorrow. There's no closing. I'm just leasing the whole building for 20 years. So very popular, very underutilized. It's just amazing how many people don't utilize that strategy. So yeah, I'll do that when it fits that deal.
Gotcha. No, very good point. Now I've got some follow-up questions on that sponsor break, and then we'll be right back.
How do you build a company that lasts? One with a solid foundation that gets better with time, transforming the first dollar in your bank account into something more, building a product, a team, a culture, expanding to new countries, currencies, and customers, and accessing the capital you need to grow. How do you do all of that? With powerfully smooth banking that keeps you focused on bringing your vision to life.
We were just talking before the break about the master lease, and that's an excellent idea. And like you said, sometimes to incentivize the person to do it, you might put that option out there. Have you, I guess the other side of it is, if you look at it from the standpoint of using your numbers, $500,000 on the initial base price. Let's say that's your basis, and then you got that 650 master lease. Obviously the seller, the Greek kicks in, and the rest of it. I get that. But if you're able to push that value to 800,000, now you're buying it for 650. If you exercise that option, you've won in that case as well. So have you seen situations like that?
Yeah, so the name of the game is a great point. So the name of the game, as soon as that we close, quote unquote, in a master lease, and I take control of the building, my first objective is to raise my NOI, right? So I'm gonna lower my expenses where I can, raise my revenue where I can, and every dollar I make or save, doesn't matter which, by the way, goes right to my NOI, right? So at an 8 cap, for example, every dollar I make or save, doesn't matter, is times 12, right? It's always got to equal 100. So I am highly incentivized to raise my NOI, so that raises the value of the building. So to your point, if I can raise my NOI up enough, get the valuation to 800, then I would exercise my option because I have $150,000 sitting there for me, or I could sell it, right? If I offered it to you for 75,
Mhm.
right? Now, notice the master lease and the option are not together. Usually most people say put them together. No, I want them separate because they're two separate instruments. I could sell the master lease to put some cash in my pocket and keep the option, or vice versa, right? So yeah, so good point.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. Okay, all right, sounds good. So, why did low income housing become your niche? And I ask that it's not that it's a negative thing. I mean, there's
Mhm.
a lot of people doing really well in affordable housing, so I'm not beating up on it at all. But why did you find that to be the niche that you wanted to go after? Was it just the pricing, or do you plan one day to go into more luxury housing? I mean, what's the dichotomy there that keeps you where you are?
Yeah, so when I started, it was the pricing, right? I got spreadsheet fever like everybody else, I see these numbers, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, Imma make a fortune," and then, of course, you start to realize as you get into the business that sometimes those really amazing numbers are there for a reason, right? I mean, you can't underwrite no copper, being in the basement, right? So what I found was I don't find, and this is gonna be a controversial statement, but it's true, that I find that low income housing isn't any more of a headache than high, class A or B is class C, C minus is where I operated. I find the upper end properties to be just as headache filled. They're getting the same amount of phone calls. They're just getting different phone calls, right? So you're renting to a doctor and a lawyer, you're getting, my cabinet's door squeaky kind of call, right? Because they're paying a premium. Listen, you go to a high end steakhouse and you order $120 steak, it better be cooked medium rare. Yeah, you go to Outback or something. It's a good steak. It's good. It's good enough. So I don't get any more phone calls. I just get a different phone call, right? I get my boyfriend's drunk and won't leave, DEA kicked down the door, sneakers hanging from the telephone wires. There's drug dealers everywhere. I just get different calls, but I'm paid handsomely to do that. But what I have learned is, and this is experience, not smarts, that if you don't run it like a tight ship and you want a friend, buy a puppy. That's my unofficial motto. Then you'll get eaten alive in that business. So I'm a very nice guy, but I run a very tight ship. I should say, ran a very tight ship. Thus the 31-page lease, which is crazy, but
Yeah.
that's what you need. Yeah.
Got you, got you. I do have to ask you because I understand you have some skills in karate. Have you ever had to use any of those on evicting a tenant or
I
anything?
never have. So jujitsu specifically. Yeah, I never have.
I
I'm
know you
so
ain't spoken that good.
yeah, no, that's a great question. I've had a few instances. I'll tell you a couple stories. So I had to hire a gang one time. I did, yeah. And so this is a great story. So my wife, who by the way is a tougher landlord than I'll ever be. And I really mean that. I don't mean that just kind of making a joke. She's way tougher than me. So my wife would would just evict everybody. Just mass. Notices to quit to the mothers, the aunts, everybody. Everybody gets an eviction, like Oprah. You get one, you get one. And that would have pissed some people off. So she did that to a gang. I won't say the city, but central Connecticut. And they didn't take that well. So they threatened her life. And that's just a situation where you don't call the cops. You deal with them. The low income landlord. We have a lot of connections. So we hired a gang to go deal with their gang. And they did. They squashed it. And we ended up hiring the gang leader. And he was an employee of ours for years. And he would go collect rent.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I got a few of those, by the way, but no, I've never had to use any jujitsu skills, and at my age, I'd probably pull a muscle doing it, so
Oh man. All right. Well, that's interesting because like you said, there's both sides of that coin. You got
there it
the
is,
benefit.
yes.
So yeah.
And there is, and, you have to understand you're dealing with people's housing, and so, if and to your point, Joe, you do have to play a little. I mean, you're a part-time priest, cop, dad, psychologist, mental health worker, banker. I mean, you're everything to everybody. It's not right, but it's just the way it is in that business, and you have to kind of put yourself in a position to not be in that position, right? Because you're dealing with people's housing. And if they have kids, they're going to get desperate, and people get desperate to do stupid stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, I like to think I was smart about being in situations when I shouldn't be in that situation, if that makes any sense the way I say that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. No, I get it. I get it. Now, I know firsthand that there's a lot of light tech deals that are out there, low income housing tax credit deals. You also have, I know personally, of a lot of equity investors that focus on affordable housing. And we're talking about obviously institutional level capital and things like that.
Yeah.
So, have you ever thought about ramping up to those larger deals using that kind of capital, or it's just not your
No.
space?
No, it really isn't. So I have a very low threshold for administrative burden, right? So I am a petulant child. Yeah, so 203K loan. I have no interest in doing that. Too much paperwork. So the low income tax credit housing, very profitable. If you can have that administrative burden capabilities offshored, then that's a great business to be in. I am not suited for that. And I've learned that. So I would constantly fight with the housing authorities. So one story years ago in a building I owned, I don't remember how many units, maybe a 12-unit building, had this long-term Section 8 tenant. And the way the building was structured, I paid all the utilities. Normally, I wouldn't want to do that, but this was a building built in, I don't know, 1910. And the juice was not worth the squeeze to separate the utilities. I'll pay the utilities, one furnace, one electrical, and just the rent is charged accordingly, right? So,
Mhm.
well, they hired a new Section 8 inspector, and he comes to does their yearly inspection, and the way I handled those inspections was I let the Section 8 tenant know that that's your inspection, ain't mine. It passed inspection, thus you live here. This yearly thing's about you. It ain't about me. So if you fail, you're gonna sleep under a bridge, so you better make sure it doesn't fail. Well, I had this one inspector, the unit was fine, and the inspector insisted that, well, I just need to see the basement. And I'm like, why? Like, well, I just need to check it off. I'm like, why pay all the utilities? It's not her furnace. Now if she was paying the heat, I still don't agree with it, but I understand it.
Mhm.
If she's paying the heat, I want to see the furnace. She's paying nothing. And so I just refused. I'm like, no. So like, oh, well, it's not a big deal. I'm not inspecting the basement. I just got to go down there and I got to say I went there. I'm like, no. She's like, well, you're gonna lose a tenant. I'm like, I'm okay with that, and they're like, you're gonna lose a long-term tenant over this. I'm like, absolutely, no problem at all, and the whole housing authority got involved, the director, and I wouldn't give in. I'm principled. So I'm answering your question in long form. I am not well suited for all the bureaucracy that I would face in the low income tax credit business. I would fail, in fact. Yeah, I am the wall that yes crashes against. I don't do that.
Gotcha, gotcha. So I understand you own at least at some point about 800 units, and
Owned and managed, yeah, about half and half. Yep.
okay, all right, and those are all kind of in that 10 to what 50 unit range, kind of.
Yeah, biggest one, and that's why it's hard to pinpoint an exact number. So I'll give you an example. I was partners, still am, in fact, on 137 units. But I don't own it outright, so I don't like to tell people I own it, right? Yeah, so I'm a partner in it, but I guess to make my unit count sound bigger, I could say I own it, right? I hate when people do that though. So yeah, our sweet spot was anywhere from 6 to 10 units. So kind of small, but still commercial. So therefore, we can take advantage of DSCR loans plus and I don't want to say manipulation, that sounds wrong. The NOI manipulation, right? The forced appreciation which you can't do that in residential, right?
Mhm.
So as soon as we would close on the building, we would, of course, raise our revenue, lower our expenses, which of correspondingly raises our NOI. And depending on the underlying financing we have, we would either cash out of that to go buy more or just keep it there. And then the effect of that NOI raise outside of financing, excuse me, is actually just more money in my pocket because I didn't always want to cash out because it's tax-free money, but it's more debt now, right? That's the downside.
Yeah, yeah. And just to explain to the audience, well, why don't you do it? What is a DSCR loan? What does the DSCR stand for, and what type of loan is it? So I'll let you
So debt service coverage ratio, good point,
right.
Joel. So DSCR's debt service coverage ratio, and really what they're doing is they're not saying, "How are you gonna pay us back, Ron?" They're saying, "How is the building gonna pay us back?" Right?
Right.
So it's going off the income of the building, and for a DSCR, for them to loan on a building, it's virtually guaranteed financing as long as a couple things happen. It appraises out, number 1, but the DSCR has to be 1.25 or better. And that's really the threshold. So what does that mean? The one really doesn't mean anything. It's the 2.25 that means it. The way to look at it is this. If it's a 1.25, it needs to operate at a 25% profit. So if the building, brings in $1,000 a month, but only costs 750 a month, that's 25% buffer, if you will. That's the 0.25. So to the bank's position, the reason they can virtually guarantee you financing is because you're going to put 20 to 25% down, and there's a 25% income buffer, if you will. So they're almost, not quite, they're almost in a can't lose situation if they have to take the building back, which they don't want to do. So the advantage to a DSCR loan is that there's no tax returns needed, no W-2. I don't have one. I bought an 8-unit building. The last building I ever bought was 2 years ago. So I only owned it for 6 months. It was an 8-unit in Norwich, Connecticut. I'm in Florida. I don't have a job. I don't have a W-2. I bought it via DSCR loan. I never saw the building. So an unemployed guy from his couch in Florida bought an 8-unit in Connecticut. That's how easy it is with DSCR. So, because everybody thinks that to get bank financing, you're a banker, oh, I got to have pristine credit, mounds of paperwork, W-2, typo blood, and all that. And it's just not true with DSCR. It's a much easier path.
Yeah, yeah. So thanks for bringing that up. Just to clarify that, whenever we talk acronyms in the industry, I want to make sure people understand them
Good point.
and how
Very good
we
point.
apply. So appreciate that. So no, that's really good information. I did want to ask you about this as well before we go to our next break. Is how do you manage properties across the country like that? Because you have smaller properties. One of the advantages that we often hear about with larger properties is that you can hire a management team, right? And,
Yeah.
and if it's over 100, you can have somebody on site, or 200 in some situations. So if you're a local guy, you're living in Florida, you own property in Florida, you own property in Connecticut, but they're not big enough to hire on-staff management, on-site management. And I might be answering my own question, but how do you actually manage those properties across the country like that?
Yeah. So third party management, right? There's one of my litmus tests when I was doing coaching, which I still do, not too often, but one-on-one basis every now and then, is that when you're going to go into a new market, there's a couple things you need. You need access to job centers, right? And that's evidenced by, is there a Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's kind of nearby? Because that suggests a larger metropolitan area that you can pull from jobs, which means you got a tenant base to pull from. But it also means, are there at least 3 third-party property management companies there? And you need that, right? Oh, well, I had a student, God, went to, I want to say Steubenville, Ohio. I could be wrong. You folks in Ohio, don't come at me. But anyway, he found some great deals. The numbers worked. The demand was there. But there's only one property management company there, he said. I was like, that's a problem. Because if he doesn't work out, you're done.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to have that infrastructure. So third party property management company, they'll manage a 6-unit building. And they're going to charge you anywhere from 10 to 12%, of expected or collected. It depends on how you structure your deal. Now, the other side of that is, and I debated doing this when I was large enough, do I become vertically integrated and bring in and hire my own people, right? My own contractor, my own property, and just they're now an employee of mine. I never did that. I kind of wish I did. That is an advantage to owning a large enough portfolio that you can bring all that in-house. One of my students has, I want to say, 250 units in the central Connecticut area, and he has a full-time maintenance guy and a full-time office gal. And he says his life is much easier just doing it that way.
Okay. All right. So talk to me a little bit about the coaching. You mentioned that, and I didn't know you did any coaching. So is that something that you do systematically, or is it just kind of on demand?
So at the RIA, yeah, I probably coached 500 students over the
Okay.
years, right? Because we were a large RIA. Since I've retired to Florida, I've had a few students that wanted to come to Florida and spend some time with me, and it's not really something I do as a business. But yeah, I do take on a few per year, but it's a one-on-one thing. It's I guess bespoke. It would be the the fancy word, right? But I work one-on-one, and they come spend a weekend down in the St. Augustine area, and we deep dive. We work hard, and they go home and make offers, and I work with them for the life of their business, and we just go over offers, how to acquire them, how to find them, how to manage them. Once you do that, right? 'Cause that's the third rail.
Gotcha, gotcha. Do you JV with some of these folks, or is
No, I
it your-
never believed in. Yeah, no, it's your deal. Yeah, it's your deal. Yeah, it's not mine. I don't want, I don't need to eat at your trough. But I work with them. I really do for the life of their business. There's no fine print. I don't charge them monthly or nothing like that. Just it's a very informal thing that I do. But yeah, I do that. I mean, I charge. Don't get me wrong, but I really love doing that at the RIA. That's what I miss.
Yeah,
So I don't want to call it a hobby, but I guess it is. Yeah.
gotcha, gotcha. All right, well, sounds good. Well, we're gonna take a quick commercial break, right quick, and then we'll be right back to finish our discussion with Ron Farsi. Thank you so much.
The Impact Air 99. We asked real people, try the Impact Air 99.
Breathable, light, but protective.
Feels very comfortable wearing it. It looks cooler.
It's almost surprising how much air you can get in.
Engineered with 6 layers of nanoscreen technology that blocks over 99% of viruses and bacteria while allowing you to breathe freely and speak clearly.
My glasses are not fogging up.
I could wear this all day.
Joel Miller here with Mornings with Joel CRE Podcast. We have so Ron, let's talk a little bit about it. And I appreciate all the background that you've given on your history and everything else. It's quite the story. And I think there's a lot of folks that would love to just be looking out the window at the beach and enjoying the beauty of St. Augustine and all those type things. So that's a beautiful thing. I'm sure you're enjoying it. Let's talk about a little bit about the RIA, because there's a gazillion things that you can join. If you're like me, you get notifications every single day of come to this, come to that. What about this? What about that? What value have you found in the RIA as to why you eventually, invested in one and then, was able to exit? I mean, there must be some real value there, and it must have worked in your case. So talk to us a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, to all your listeners, if you're new into real estate, I really believe that the first thing you should do, day one, step one, is join your local RIA, right? There's Atlanta has a RIA, Atlanta RIA, probably two, in fact. There's 200 of them throughout the United States. And it is just a room, that's your tribe. But in that room, you're going to meet your hard money lender, your eviction attorney, your closing attorney, your contractor, right? Your banker, future partner, future investors, So you're going to get the network, you're going to get the education, the contacts, and all that. And I believe that, momentum begets momentum. Just getting in the room is something. Just show up. It changed my life. I mean, it truly did. It sounds hokey. And I got so much out of it. I think there's a commercial, right? I loved it so much I bought the company, right? What is that commercial years ago? But I really do believe in it, and I believe it even though I don't have a vested interest in RIA today. But that's the first thing you should do. Now, there's other meetups out there. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a RIA, but a RIA I find is a little more structured. That you're there to, and it's usually the most well-attended event in any locale. But also they bring in, not all the time, but most RIAs bring in an outside speaker for that month, right? And he'll be talking about whatever his or her specialty is that month. Now they're selling a product probably, and a program, which you do not have to buy, but they usually talk for a couple hours and give away some great nuggets. So whether you buy the program or not is on you. Some RIAs have a coaching program, a formal coaching program. Some do not. And coaching may or may not be right for everybody. What I find, and I say this as a former coach, so take it for what it's worth, but anytime you can rent somebody's brain, oh, but Ron, I can watch YouTube or get a book. Yes, you can. We're speeding up the process. That's all we're doing, right? We're renting somebody's brain to go from first base to third base. That's really what we're trying to do. But yeah, join your local RIA. It's a life-changing organization, in my opinion.
All right. No, that's good information to know, and certainly appreciate it. And I guess the big thing that I'm getting from what you're saying there is that you have quality people, there, because that's becomes the challenge. Someone like myself who's been in the industry a long time, you say, do I really need that? But the idea of maybe people newer in the industry, or as long as there's real people in the room, you can get that value. So it might be a matter of just checking it out for yourself and finding out what the real value is there.
Yeah. You bring up a great point. So, one of the struggles I had as a RIA is you're right, though. So, to an experienced operator such as yourself, what can I do to make it worth you being in the room? Because you never want to be the smartest guy in the room, right? And that's eventually you do become the smartest guy in the room, at least with respect to real estate. And I ran into that too, that I acquired enough that I stopped going to the meetings because it's geared a little more towards the newer people. And what you're seeing now is more RIAs, including my former one, starting to gear towards more guys like you, Joel, and that usually happens 45 minutes before the main meeting starts. They have the experienced operators meeting, and you have to have 5 deals or more under your belt to go to this meeting, to give you something of value, so check your local RIA for that too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, and I appreciate that because our audience is mixed. So we have some people that are very experienced, very seasoned, and we
Yeah.
have some that are newer, trying to get into the game. Which actually, just to be candid, most people know the background of the show, but that's kind of where it started. It started with speaking engagements that I used to do, and people would say, "Hey, I want to reconnect with you," and I would say, "All right, you come to our meetings, look over our shoulder, you'll see how we put deals together and make things happen." And then, but the questions became so much, it was like, you know what? I got to do something more formal where I could,
Yeah.
present information in bulk as opposed to just one-on-one.
Great way to put it. Great way to put it. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you're
that's kind of how we got here today where we are.
amazing.
Yeah. But no, that's really interesting. So as we wrap up, let's talk a little bit. You showed one of your books. I understand you've written a couple of books, so that's something that I'm sure folks would like to know about.
Shameless plug.
The landlord
Yeah,
one.
it's 343 pages.
Wrote all of that.
I did. And listen, I'm a hunt and peck guy. You should have seen me type it. One thing, just so I did. And I put a lot of work into it over the last 6 months. And it was just 300 tips and tricks. I mean, crazy ones, Joel. One chapter is orange handles, I call it. It's a crazy tip. Hear me out. So orange handles, when you buy a building, at least in the Northeast and in the Midwest, but anywhere in America, you would buy a building on day one, the first thing you should do is find the master water shutoff valve or handle. There's one. And now in the Northeast and Midwest, it's in the basement, right? And you want to find that one magic shutoff handle and paint it bright orange or bright red, anything that sticks out. Because what's going to happen is you have a up-down 2-family. The lady downstairs calls you and says, "Hey, Joel, there's water running in the kitchen from upstairs." Well, it turns out that they got a leak upstairs and the lady upstairs is at work. How do you shut off the water? And you're on the phone with her going, "Well, go down in the basement and turn the handle." What handle? There's 100 of them, right? So tips and tricks like that.
They're all great.
Yeah, what do I do? Right. So, another tip I put in the book, this is a funny one. You'll like this one. So years ago, and I learned this from an old time landlord years ago, but I had a building in New Britain, Connecticut. It's a little burg in central Connecticut. Had drug dealers everywhere, right? And you always know, because and the problem is drug dealers is that they ruin the building and good tenants leave. So anytime you see sneakers hanging from the telephone wires, that's drug dealing. And so anyway, I couldn't get rid of these guys. And I tried and tried and tried. Finally, what I did was I formulated a letter. Dear valued tenants, apologies that if you see a bunch of drug sniffing canines, we have partnered with the local law enforcement agency to train their canine dogs. So they'll be walking around the parking lots, the hallways, and all that. So we apologize in advance that you'll see all these dogs. We'll be training over the next several weeks, and learn how to sniff drugs. Well, that'll get rid of the drug dealers, and it did. Yeah, they scattered like cockroaches. Yeah. So I mean, all tips and tricks in the lease. Have an addendum, electronic communication only in the lease. Yeah, there's no oral promises, deals to be made. And the reason you want that is to cover your ass because they'll show up in housing court saying, "Your Honor, I told them to fix those steps." No, you didn't. holdover fee, $100 per calendar day. They stay beyond the lease date, to incentivize them because they always, if the end of the lease date falls on a Sunday, I guarantee you they're not going to leave, right? Because they can't get the U-Haul on Sunday, so they got to wait till Monday, and then they'll be out on Tuesday. Then they move out Monday night at 1 a.m., waking up all the neighbors. So you have a very clearly defined move out date is 12:01 p.m. You have to be out. You're not gonna move in the middle of the night, and it's $100 per calendar day for every day after that. Da 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 da. So little tips and tricks like that.
Gotcha. Do you also, being that they're low income, do you have them pay deposits? I mean,
Oh yeah. So now that's state and local specific, of course,
Okay.
right? But I was always 2 months security, first month's rent, 3 months to move.
2 months security.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you can't come up with that, we're gonna struggle every single month for 1 month. So will I finance it? No. You want to finance a burrito over 4 payments on Klarna? Go ahead. You ain't financing your security deposit. And by the way, your all move-in monies have to be. I know. You can tell I'm not real popular. So, but all move-in monies have to be cash or certified bank check. No money orders. Never take a money order. And certainly no personal checks for move-in monies. All move-in monies must be cash or certified bank check. So little tips and tricks like that. Yeah. So that's a lifetime of experience and lessons learned, if I'm being honest. Yeah.
No, that's a good point, because it's really the little things that hurt you. You get hurt the most by not knowing what you don't know, right? You don't
That's
know what you don't
exactly
know,
right. It's
right?
never the big stuff.
Right.
It's that little stuff. And once and it's okay that little stuff burns you. That's okay. But if it burns you twice, then you got a problem, right?
Yeah.
So, and the object is to just take that lesson, take that L and, file it up here and, systemize it. And that's what I've done.
Yeah. So yeah, if you can learn it ahead of time by reading your book or something else, then that's valued.
Or something else. Yeah. So I'll tell you another one. I used to always, here's a lesson I've learned. And I learned this several times before I wised up. So in low income housing, what happens is, and I'm generalizing here. It's not all low income, but generally, what happens is they shove, because there's usually less storage, right? Because there's your cheaper buildings. There's not as many closets. They're smaller closets. So what happens is under the bathroom sink and under the kitchen sink, they shove everything under there. All the cleaning supplies if they have them, but whatever's under there, they stuff it full. You'll never see a sparsely populated cabinet sink.
Yeah.
Okay. So why does that matter? So what matters is they shove stuff in there and it hits the P trap. And you see little drips.
Yeah.
Not big, they're just little drips. And they don't even know it's there, maybe, or they do know and they don't give a shit. So what they'll do is just nothing. So when you go there, that little drip over 6 months, now the whole bottom is soaking wet. You can kind of push against it, and it's like, oh, it's moist, right? It's like, oh, so now it's all rotted.
Yeah, and they got
So wait,
chemical issues. Yeah.
that's right. So what you do is on every turnover, I want you to go to the store and I want you to buy the Flex Seal paint. You see it on TV, not the spray, the paint. They actually make a paint and it's just a thick, like peanut butter level viscosity paint, but it's rubber. I want you to paint the bottom of that cabinet and go up the sidewalls, maybe an inch or two. So it's not going to stop an avalanche of water, but it's going to stop that little leak from rotting your thing. It sounds crazy, but it works. So now, does it matter if you have a 2-family? Probably not. But what if you have 400 units? Now it matters, right? So because that's all increasing your NOI if you really think about it. So little tips and tricks like that matter at scale.
Yeah. No, that's really insightful. I mean, I wouldn't have given that any thought, but you're absolutely right. They'll shove all that stuff under the cabinet and you got an issue.
Yeah, they knock around on the pipes. Yeah,
That's right.
they
The
do.
little can of paint is a whole lot cheaper than having to replace cabinets and
Yeah.
plumbing and all of
Yeah.
that stuff. So yeah. No, very good
Amen.
point. Very good point. So Rob, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? I know you said you got a lease, you got your books. What's a good way for folks to reach you? They want to.
I'm pretty easy to just bulletprooflease@gmail is my email. It goes right to me. I don't have a team. It's me. And bulletprooflease.com is my website. It's my lease for sale on there. It's 31 pages. It's copyrighted. It's Bulletproof Lease. It's the obvious name, right? I'm on TikTok, which is kind of funny, I guess. But I don't even know what my TikTok handle is. Bulletproof Lease. That's the best way to get a hold of me. And I'm around. So I'm easy to get a hold of.
All right. Well, sounds good. Well, Rod, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing those insights. A lot of value from that. And, you've made a good living in an area where most people run from, low income housing, difficult areas, but you've found a way to make it work. And that's impressive. And I appreciate you sharing your insights on the show. So thank you so
Well, I
much.
appreciate you having me on the show. And I really had a blast doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any final comments for our audience before we wrap up?
No, you know what? Here's my advice to you. Go out and make offers. You don't make offers, you're not going to buy property. I would make 100 offers in a month sometimes. Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, here's my offer. You don't have to take it, but here's my offer. So go make an offer today.
Good point. Good point. Certainly appreciate that. Well, guys, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate Rod being here as well. And this is the Mornings with Joel CRE Podcast. Look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thank you so much, Rod. And I'm sure we'll keep in touch and we'll be talking soon.
Love it, Joel. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. Thank you.